There are certain things you expect to find when you come home after 3 weeks on the road. Maybe a pile of junk mail. Maybe an overgrown lawn if the landscaping guy missed a week. Maybe that weird smell houses get when they've been sitting closed up for too long. What I didn't expect to find was a 20-foot fishing boat sitting in the middle of my driveway like it had a mortgage payment and voting rights. The crazy part wasn't even that it was there. The crazy part was how comfortable it looked. Like it belonged. Like it had been there long enough to settle in. I remember sitting in my truck at the curb, engine still running, staring through the windshield and thinking maybe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing. Maybe somebody had an emergency. Maybe one of the neighbors needed temporary storage. Maybe there was a note on my front door. I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt first. Years of consulting work teaches you that most problems look personal until you find the missing piece of information. But something about this felt different. The boat wasn't parked awkwardly. It wasn't halfway in and halfway out. It was centered perfectly, deliberately, like somebody had measured it. I grabbed my suitcase and walked next door. For the sake of the story, let's call my neighbor Rick Dawson. Rick was one of those guys every neighborhood seems to have. Mid-50s, broad shoulders, sunburned neck year-round, always wearing baseball caps advertising companies that probably went out of business 15 years ago. We weren't friends, but we weren't enemies either. We waved. We exchanged the occasional weather comment. We existed in that comfortable suburban middle ground where nobody knows much about each other and everybody seems fine with it. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. A minute later, the door opened halfway. Rick looked at me, then looked past me toward my driveway. Not surprised, not confused, just mildly inconvenienced. I pointed toward the boat. "Hey, Rick, I think that belongs to you." He glanced over my shoulder. "Yep, that was it. Yep." I waited for the rest. It never came. "So, it's in my driveway." He shrugged. "You're gone a lot." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain needed a second to process what I'd just heard. What does that have to do with anything? Another shrug. "Figured you weren't using it." There are moments when someone says something so absurd your mind rejects it before your emotions catch up. That was one of those moments. I kept waiting for him to smile and tell me he was joking. He never did. "Well, I'm back now." "Okay. I need you to move it." He nodded. "I'll get to it." Then he closed the door. Conversation over. I stood there for a few seconds staring at the paint peeling off his front porch rail, wondering if I'd somehow missed part of the interaction. Then I went home. An hour passed. Nothing. 2 hours. Nothing. By sunset, the boat hadn't moved an inch. That irritation started crawling under my skin. Not because of the inconvenience. Honestly, I could park on the street for a night. That wasn't the issue. It was the assumption, the confidence, the idea that my property had somehow become community property because my travel schedule happened to be inconvenient. Around 11 that night, I pulled up my security camera system. Nothing fancy. Just a few cameras around the house so I could check things while traveling. I started scrolling backward. 1 day, 2 days, 5 days. Then my stomach tightened. The boat wasn't new. It had been there before. A lot. I kept going, week after week, month after month. The footage became a blur of changing weather and different sunlight angles, but one thing stayed consistent. Rick's boat. Sometimes there for a few days, sometimes gone, then back again. And it wasn't just the boat. That was the part that really got me. I started noticing people. Guys unloading coolers, people carrying fishing gear, a couple folding lawn chairs. One afternoon, 4 men stood in my driveway drinking beer while loading equipment into the boat, like they were preparing for a weekend tournament. One clip showed someone setting up a folding table near my garage door. My garage door, on my property, while I was in Phoenix helping a distribution company solve warehouse problems. I sat back in my office chair and stared at the screen. The longer I watched, the worse it got. This wasn't occasional use. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't somebody making a bad decision once. This was a routine, a habit, a system. And suddenly Rick's reaction made perfect sense. He wasn't asking permission because, in his mind, permission had already been granted. Not by me. By my absence. I stayed up until almost 2 in the morning reviewing footage, building a timeline, taking screenshots, writing notes. The consultant part of my brain kicked in automatically. Patterns, frequency, behavior, evidence. By the time I finished, I had documented nearly 10 months of repeated use. 10 months. I remember standing in my kitchen afterward with a glass of water, staring out the window at that boat sitting under the streetlight. The neighborhood was quiet. No traffic, no noise, just that boat. And I kept asking myself the same question. When exactly had my driveway stopped being mine? The next morning, I didn't go back to Rick's house. I didn't argue. I didn't leave angry notes. Instead, I made a phone call. Her name was Dana Whitmore, real estate attorney. I'd worked with her years earlier during a commercial property dispute involving one of my clients. Dana was the kind of lawyer who never sounded impressed by drama. You could tell her aliens landed in your backyard, and she probably asked for documentation. After hearing the situation, she was quiet for a few seconds. Then she asked one question. Do you have a property survey? I think so. Find it. That was the beginning, not of an argument, not of a feud, of something much more dangerous. A paper trail. I dug through storage boxes in my office closet and found the original closing documents from when I bought the house. Survey maps, property descriptions, easement information, everything. I scanned it all, then I uploaded camera footage, dates, times, screenshots, patterns. By noon, everything was in Dana's inbox. A few hours later, she called back. No small talk, no warm-up, just facts. Your driveway is entirely within your property line. I looked out the window. The boat was still there. What about shared access? None. Easements? No. Anything unclear? Not even remotely. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Certainty. Then Dana said something I still remember, word for word. If you want his behavior to stop permanently, don't focus on changing what he's doing. Focus on changing why he's doing it. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. A week later, I would. At first, Dana's advice sounded like something you'd hear in a business seminar, the kind of phrase people write down because it sounds smart even if they don't completely understand it. But over the next couple of days, the more I thought about Rick, the more it started making sense. The reason he kept using my driveway wasn't because he hated me. It wasn't because we had some long-standing feud. It wasn't even because he was trying to steal something. The reason was much simpler. Using my property cost him nothing. No consequences, no inconvenience, no risk. As long as that equation stayed the same, there was no reason for him to stop. So Dana and I decided to change the equation. The following Saturday, I drove 30 minutes outside town to an industrial supply company. The guy working the counter looked confused when I told him what I needed. You protecting a storefront? No. A warehouse? No. He looked at me for a second. What are you protecting? I smiled. A lesson. He laughed. I didn't. A few minutes later, I loaded a heavy steel security bollard into the back of my truck. Nothing fancy. No bright colors, no dramatic spikes, just a thick steel post with a locking mechanism designed to stop vehicles from entering private property, the kind of thing nobody notices until they absolutely have to. That weekend, I installed it at the entrance to my driveway, digging the foundation to most of Saturday. By Sunday afternoon, it stood solidly in place, permanent, unmovable, clear. Then I added a sign, Privat, property unautorized VHE keel subject to towing. Simple, professional, impossible to misunderstand. When I stepped back and looked at it, I felt something I hadn't felt since returning home. Control. Not because I was trying to dominate anyone, because the boundary was visible again. For months it had existed only on paper, now it existed in steel. The following Monday, Dana sent me a draft letter. I read through it slowly, then read it again. Not because it was complicated, because it was surprisingly calm. There was no anger in it, no accusations, no emotional language, just facts. The letter documented unauthorized use of private property over an extended period, referenced photographic evidence, referenced property records. Then it presented two options. Option 1. Remove all personal property from the driveway within 72 hours and cease future use permanently. Option 2. Enter into a formal rental agreement, $195 per month, plus retroactive payment covering previous use. $2,145. I remember leaning back in my chair after finishing the document. The number wasn't random. Dana had researched local storage rates, vehicle parking rates, and comparable property rentals. Everything was supported. Everything was defensible. Most importantly, everything was legal. We mailed it certified. Signature required. Then we waited. The response came faster than expected. That evening there was a hard knock on my front door. Not the kind of knock someone uses when they're dropping off cookies. The kind of knock someone uses when they've been rehearsing an argument during the entire walk across the yard. I opened the door. Rick stood there holding the letter. His face was red, not furious, worse, offended. What the hell is this? I glanced at the paper. It explains itself. He waved it in the air. You serious right now? Very. He laughed. The fake kind. The kind people use when they're trying to convince themselves something isn't happening. You want me to pay you for parking in a driveway you don't even use? There it was again. The same logic. The same assumption, as if ownership only counted when someone was physically present. I leaned against the door frame. I do use it. You travel all the time. And you aren't here. I nodded slowly. Which is exactly when you decided to start using it. For a second he just stared at me. Then he shook his head. Man, come on, I said nothing. You never complained. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was incredible. Imagine getting caught breaking into someone's shed and defending yourself by saying they never objected while they were asleep. I didn't know. His jaw tightened. That's not my fault. No, I said. Using my property without permission is. Bat landed. I could see it, not agreement. Recognition. The uncomfortable realization that the conversation wasn't going where he'd expected. He pointed at the number on the letter. $2,000, $2,145. That's insane. It's documented. His eyes narrowed. You've been keeping records? Now it was my turn to shrug. You're not the only one who plans ahead. The look he gave me right then was interesting. Not anger. Not exactly. It was the expression people make when they realize they misjudged someone. For almost a year he'd treated my absence like weakness. Now he was discovering it wasn't. It was simply distance, and those are very different things. Eventually he folded the letter. Not carefully. Not politely. Just enough to shove it under his arm. I'm not signing this. Then move the boat. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. He stared at me, waiting, for compromise, for negotiation, for guilt, for something. When none came, he turned and walked away. Halfway down the path, he stopped. You know what your problem is, I smiled. No. What? You make everything complicated. I watched him disappear into his house, then quietly said to myself, no, Rick, I just finally started paying attention. The 72-hour deadline started ticking. Day 1, nothing happened. Day 2, nothing happened. Day 3, still nothing. The boat sat exactly where it had been sitting for months, like he believed reality would eventually bend around his confidence. And something unexpected happened. The neighborhood started talking. I was outside checking the lock on the bollard when an older woman named Eleanor stepped out from across the street. Eleanor had lived there forever, one of those neighbors who somehow knows every dog by name at every package delivery schedule within a 3-block radius. She nodded toward the boat. About time. I laughed. You too? Oh, honey, she said. Everybody's noticed. That caught me off guard. Everybody? She looked genuinely surprised. You didn't know. Apparently I didn't. She told me she'd seen Rick using my driveway for months. Friends coming and going, fishing trips, weekend gatherings, early morning departures, late-night returns. The kind of details only someone who spends a lot of time gardening notices. Then she said something that stuck with me. At first, he acted like it was temporary. I looked at her. At first, she nodded. Then he stopped acting. That sentence followed me the rest of the day. Because she was right. There had probably been a moment when Rick knew exactly what he was doing, a moment when he understood he was crossing a line. But every day that passed without consequences made the line a little harder to see, until eventually it disappeared entirely. Later that afternoon, another neighbor named Chris stopped while walking his golden retriever. You finally dealing with Rick? I laughed. Is the whole street discussing this? Chris grinned. Pretty much. Then his expression changed. Honestly, man, we all figured you were letting him. I blinked. What? He shrugged. You travel. He parks there. Nobody complained. We assumed you guys had some arrangement. That hit me differently, because suddenly I saw the situation from the outside, not through my eyes, not through Rick's, through everyone else's. Silence looks a lot like permission, especially when it lasts long enough. By the end of the week, 3 different neighbors had independently confirmed the same story, the same timeline, the same pattern. The same increasing confidence, and whether Rick realized it or not, his version of events was starting to fall apart, not because of me, because reality had witnesses. Then 72 hours expired. The boat was still there. And on the morning of day 4, I picked up my phone. I called the towing company. The woman who answered sounded routine, professional. unemotional. I gave her the address, the vehicle information, the documentation. She told me they could have someone there within 24 hours. I thanked her, hung up, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt strangely calm, because the next move wasn't mine anymore. It was his. What I didn't know yet was that before the tow truck ever arrived, Rick was about to show up at my front door one more time. Only this time, he wasn't coming to argue. He was coming because for the first time in nearly a year, he had finally realized he might actually lose. Only this time, he wasn't coming to argue. He was coming because, for the first time in nearly a year, he had finally realized he might actually lose. The knock came just after sunset. Not loud, not aggressive, just 3 slow taps. I was standing in the kitchen making coffee when I heard it. When I opened the door, Rick looked different. It's hard to explain exactly what had changed. He wasn't apologetic, not yet, but the certainty was gone. The confidence that had carried him through every previous conversation had disappeared. He was holding the letter again. The edges were bent now. I could fold it and unfold it a dozen times. "You really called a towing company?" I nodded. I did. He looked past me toward the driveway, toward the steel bollard, toward the boat. Then he let out a long breath. "That thing costs a fortune to move." I didn't answer, partly because I didn't know what to say, partly because for months he hadn't cared what anything cost me. The silence stretched. Finally, he looked back at me. "This is getting kind of crazy." I tilted my head. "Is it?" Another pause, longer this time. Then something happened that genuinely surprised me. His shoulders dropped, not dramatically, just enough to signal surrender. I guess I pushed it. There it was. The first honest sentence he'd spoken since this entire mess started. No excuses, no blaming me, no talk about how often I traveled, no claims that I wasn't using the space, just the truth. Simple and uncomfortable. I guess I pushed it. I nodded. "Yeah." He looked down at the paper, then back at me. "If I sign this?" He hesitated. "Are we done?" It was an interesting question, because what he was really asking wasn't about paperwork. He was asking if we could stop fighting, if there was a path back, if the bridge was damaged or destroyed. I thought about it for a second, then answered honestly, "If you follow the agreement, we're done." He stared at me, trying to decide whether there was a trap hidden inside that answer. Eventually, he nodded. "Okay." And just like that, he left. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic ending. Just a tired man walking back across his lawn carrying a letter he never expected to sign. The next afternoon he came back, this time with a check, $2,145. I won't pretend there wasn't something satisfying about that moment, not because of the money. Honestly, the money wasn't life-changing, not even close, but because it represented something else. Acknowledgement. For the first time, Rick was treating my property like it actually belonged to me. He handed over the check, then handed over the signed agreement. His signature looked angry, heavy, pressed deep into the paper, like he was trying to leave dents in it. I reviewed everything, made sure every page was complete, then nodded. "We're good." Without another word, he walked past me toward the driveway. I stood there watching. The afternoon sun was dropping behind the houses. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. For a strange moment, everything felt cinematic, almost unreal. Because for nearly a year that boat had come and gone whenever it wanted. Now, for the first time, it was leaving because the owner finally understood where the boundary was. The engine started. The trailer rolled backward. The tires crossed the property line. And just like that, my driveway was empty. I wish I could tell you there was applause, or cheering neighbors, or some dramatic movie ending. There wasn't. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a problem finally stops taking up space in your head. A week later, the first payment arrived, $195, right on schedule. Then another the following month, then another, month after month. No missed payments, no arguments, no surprises. The agreement worked, which honestly wasn't the part that surprised me. The surprising part was Rick, because over time he changed, not overnight, not completely, but noticeably. The first few months he barely looked at me. If we crossed paths, he'd nod and keep walking. Then gradually that started changing. Small conversations, weather, football, neighborhood updates, nothing deep, nothing personal, but civil. One afternoon, almost 6 months later, I was trimming a tree near the sidewalk when he walked over carrying a coffee. He stood there awkwardly for a few seconds, then held one cup out toward me. I accepted it. He rubbed the back of his neck. You know, whenever someone starts a sentence that way, you know something interesting is coming. He looked down the street. I was pretty sure you'd cave. I laughed. Yeah, I figured. No, he said, shaking his head. You don't understand. He pointed toward my driveway. I'd been parking there so long it stopped feeling like your driveway. That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because it was probably the most honest thing anyone had said throughout the entire situation. Not because it justified anything. It didn't, but because it explained everything. People adapt surprisingly fast. Give someone access to something long enough and eventually they stop seeing it as borrowed. They start seeing it as theirs, or at least partly theirs. Rick wasn't describing a driveway anymore. He was describing human nature. I thought about that conversation for days afterward. Not because of him, because of him. Because if I was being honest, I could see smaller versions of that behavior in my own life. Not with property, but with relationships, opportunities, people's time. The things we assume will always be there because they've always been there. The things we stop appreciating because nobody forces us to. Sometimes boundaries don't disappear all at once. Sometimes they fade slowly. One ignored moment at a time, one assumption at a time, until nobody remembers exactly where they were supposed to be. About a year after everything happened, Dana called to check in. We were discussing something unrelated when she asked about Rick. I gave her the update, the payments, the agreement, the peace. She laughed. See, I told you. Told me what? Behavior follows incentives. I smiled. Because she was right. The argument hadn't changed, Rick. The contract had. Not through punishment, through clarity. Suddenly the cost was visible. The rules were visible. The boundary was visible. And once people can see a boundary clearly, most of them stop pretending it isn't there. Most of them, not all. There was one clause in that agreement that deserves mentioning. Actually, it ended up becoming my favorite part. Dana insisted on adding it, even though I thought it was excessive at the time. If a single payment was missed, the parking agreement terminated automatically, immediately. No grace period, no negotiations, no extensions. The bollard remained locked. The vehicle would be removed within 24 hours at the owner's expense. Simple. Direct. Final. Over the years, Rick has asked me twice to remove that clause. Never aggressively. Never angrily. More like someone checking whether the fence still exists. Both times I gave him the same answer. No. Not because I wanted leverage. Not because I wanted control. Because the clause wasn't really there for him anymore. It was there for me. As a reminder of what happens when boundaries exist only in your head. Now, every time I pull into that driveway, I see the bollard. Most people probably don't even notice it. It's just a piece of steel, a practical object. But to me it means something else. It reminds me how easy it is to let small things slide, how easy it is to avoid confrontation, how easy it is to assume people will respect limits that are never actually enforced. And every now and then I still wonder about something. What if I hadn't come home when I did? What if that work trip had lasted another month, another 6 months, another year? Would the boat still be there? Would his friends still be gathering on my property? Would anyone even remember that the driveway belonged to me? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe that's the part that bothers me most. Not what happened, but how easily it happened. How quickly a line can disappear when nobody is standing near it. So now I'm curious what you think. Was I too strict? Should I have just let it go and kept the peace? Would you have called the towing company on day one? Or would you have done exactly what I did and forced the issue through paperwork instead of anger? Because I have a feeling this story isn't really about a driveway. I think it's about boundaries. The ones between neighbors. The ones between friends. The ones between what's yours and what people slowly convince themselves belongs to them. Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you've ever dealt with a neighbor who crossed the line, or if you think I was the one who crossed it, I want to hear your side. And if you enjoy the story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stick around for the next one. Trust me, some people don't just test your boundaries. They build entire lives on the assumption that you won't defend them.